As the first light of dawn brushes the massive stone heads, those silent sentinels standing watch over the boundless ocean, the entire landscape seems to freeze in a sacred moment. The waves stop crashing. The wind holds its breath. Only the long shadows remain, motionless, as if time itself has paused. This is Easter Island, Rapa Nui, a lonely outpost in the vast Pacific Ocean, more than 400 kilometers from the South American mainland. A place where history appears to have stopped flowing, settling instead into layers of stone, into empty eyes staring endlessly toward the horizon. No one arrives without being enchanted. No one leaves without carrying a dozen unanswered questions. Hundreds of stone statues, known as Moai, still stand intact after centuries, defying wind, salt, and even oblivion. With pursed lips, distant gazes, and monumental bodies, carved as if from the island's own soul. The Moai are not merely statues. They are witnesses, whispering echoes of a civilization that once blazed brightly, only to quietly vanish into the dust it had created. Some of these Moai weigh over 80 tons, comparable to a Boeing airplane. They were carved from volcanic rock using primitive tools, then transported across dozens of kilometers of rugged terrain, without wheels, without metal, without beasts of burden. It seems impossible, and yet it happened. But why? Who did it, and for what purpose? In the quarries, unfinished statues still lie frozen in time, as if their carvers had paused to wipe their brows, and never returned. The entire process appears halted mid-breath, a grand project, abandoned halfway through history. And so the questions became obsessions, drawing in explorers, archaeologists, scholars, writers, filmmakers, engineers from across the globe. They came to see, to measure, to reconstruct the marvel of an ancient people. But the more they studied, the less they understood. What remained wasn't answers, but a labyrinth. Arthur C. Clarke, author of 2001, A Space Odyssey and one of the 20th century's legendary scientific minds, once wrote that no place on Earth has been studied as thoroughly as Easter Island. And yet nowhere else makes us feel like we know so little. Amid the vast skies and open land, the stone giants still stand. They do not speak. They do not move. They only watch. And sometimes it is that silent gaze that makes it impossible to turn away. It's no coincidence that all the Moai share a similar appearance, from their facial features to their stance, and even the type of stone used. Because they all began life in the same place, Rano Raraku, an extinct volcano whose heart still beats with the rhythm of ancient chisels. The ancient Rapa Nui didn't just live on the island, they lived with the stone. They chose Rano Raraku as their sacred workshop. There, hundreds of statues lie sprawled across the slopes, some tilted, some half-buried, some gazing skyward, as if a silent army awaits the moment of awakening. Rano Raraku isn't just a hill, it's a soul factory. Each block of tuff was selected, cut, and sculpted using only the simplest tools, stone striking stone. No iron, no machines. Craftsmen began by carving rectangular shapes directly into the mountainside, roughly outlining the statue's form. Only then did they separate it from the mountain's body to refine the details. A high bridge of the nose, thick lips, square jaws, and eyes empty, yet heavy with meaning. These artisans didn't work alone. It was a communal process, coordinated and meticulous, stretching over months or even years. Each statue was more than an object, it was a statement. Each Moai represented a family, a clan, an honored ancestor. And more than that, it was part of a quiet race among lineages. Who could raise the tallest, heaviest, most imposing Moai? A sculpted ego, a sacred rivalry. Anthropologist Joanne van Tilburg described each Moai as a living face, embodying the mana, or spiritual power, of the departed. When erected, a statue was not just a memorial. It was a vessel through which the deceased could remain present, still watching, still guiding, still empowering the generations that followed. Thus, Rano Raraku was not just a quarry. It was an epic carved in stone. Each chisel mark told a story. Each statue, a chapter. Each gaze, a question mark. The more I study, the less I understand, Van Tilburg said. Each answer leads to more questions. Here, we don't just look for solutions. we learn to ask things we've never thought to ask. Deeper into the mountainside, statues remain incomplete, some still face down in the rock, some nearly finished but not yet severed from the mountain's womb. Everything seems paused mid-dream, and that dreamlike stillness makes the sight all the more haunting. As if one day, someone will return and finish what was started. But no one ever came back, and for centuries, the stone giants have remained tucked between cliffs and silence, as if waiting for a different hand from a different age to understand what their own time once knew and then forgot. One theory, once dismissed as absurd, has slowly gained traction, that the Rapa Nui didn't pull the Moai, they walked them. It sounds like myth, a ghost story told by firelight under a pitch-black sky, that these statues could walk, step by step, swaying their way toward their final resting places. For years, scholars laughed at the idea, until a modern man tried to make it happen. Pavel, a Czech engineer, not an archaeologist, not a native Rapa Nui, was obsessed with one question. How could these massive stone beings be moved without modern power? In a bold experiment, he built a concrete replica of a Moai, gathered over 20 locals, handed them ropes and tried. No wheels, no rollers, just rhythm. They pulled in unison, left, right, and then the impossible happened. The statue rocked and moved forward. It looked like it was walking, as if the ancient legend had never lied. In Wyoming, USA, archaeologist Charlie Love tried the same thing. He raised a 4-meter-tall wooden Moai replica weighing nearly 8 tons. With extraordinary patience, he and a team of volunteers reproduced each movement, each tug, like a delicate stone dance. A single misstep, a mistimed pull, and the statue could collapse. The cost wouldn't just be failure, it could be lives. It's not about strength, he said. It's about harmony. 100 people, eyes closed, breathing together, moving as one. No shouting, no commander, just rhythm. If the rhythm breaks, the Moai falls. And that might be the Moai's truest essence, not just a physical monument, but the crystallization of belief, discipline, and spirit. Each step wasn't just transportation, it was a sacred transition, a soul's journey, not merely a stone's. Along the sacred paths, traces remain, not just drag marks, but signs of harmony between humans and the earth. In some places, the ground had been leveled. In others, grass has regrown around the worn grooves, as if the very land joined the procession. And when the Moai reached their destination, they weren't just dropped wherever. They were placed on ahu, sacred stone platforms, like miniature temples facing the old villages. Not to guard, but perhaps to remind. But not all Moai reach their final resting place. All across the island, statues lie unfinished, broken in half or abandoned along the paths, as if the journey stopped halfway. A migration left incomplete, a dream that never arrived, and no one knows why. Was it war? Famine? A natural disaster? Perhaps when hands grew too weak to pull, when no one remained to keep the rhythm, the entire system collapsed, like a body whose nerves had been severed. The stone giants say nothing, but sometimes their silence is louder than screams. From above, Rapa Nui looks like a lonely drop of land adrift in the Pacific. No rivers, no tall mountains, no dense forests, as we often picture in places teeming with life. But once they were there, and then they vanished. At the crater lake of Ranokau, where the wind rustles through towering reeds, scientists stopped asking questions. Instead, they drilled into the mud, into time itself, searching not for artifacts, but for memory, for pollen. Professor John Flenley and his team extracted core samples thousands of years old, each layer filled with invisible grains of pollen. Fossilized stories. Among them, they found traces of a now extinct giant palm tree related to the Chilean wine palm that once blanketed the island. Tall, lush canopies once cloaked Rapa Nui in green, shielding it like a living skin. And then all trace of pollen disappears, replaced by ash, shattered rock, and soot. The forest had been cut down to cook, to build, to sculpt, to roll the Moai. And they kept cutting and cutting until the last tree fell. No trees meant no boats. No boats meant no fishing offshore. No fish meant hunger. No forest meant no way to move the statues. And when livelihood, spirituality, and identity collapsed at once, the very roots of Rapa Nui's civilization began to rot. Death didn't come with fire and swords. It came slowly, one tree at a time. Each act seemed justified. One more canoe, one more moai, one more ritual. Until, when all was said and done, no one realized the price had become too high. But there was another voice, another accusation, not from the forests, but from beneath the ground. In the stillness before dawn, when the ocean's whispers retreat and even the wind forgets to breathe, one might hear a faint echo rising from below, as if something primal had been waiting centuries to speak. Rapa Nui does not sit quietly. It drifts atop a massive fault zone, where Earth's plates grind and shift, and eventually strike back. There are no historical records of these earthquakes, no dates, no names, but their footprints remain. Over 80% of Moai have fallen, and eerily, most fell in the same direction, westward, not scattered, not random, but as if following a shared axis, a single invisible hand. This wasn't war, this wasn't rebellion, it was seismic waves. Modern geological surveys have mapped fracture lines running across the island, crisscrossing where the Moai stand like scars buried under skin. In simulation models, seismic waves ripple outward, matching exactly the patterns of fallen statues. A single quake, just seconds long, could topple what took years to raise. No warning, no mercy. A Chilean seismologist who spent years studying every corner of the island said that only after running simulations of sequential earthquakes did he understand why the Moai stopped being built. Because when people see their sacred creations fall, not once, but again and again, they don't just lose the statues, they lose faith. It takes 3 years to raise a Moai, he explained. Then one day, the ground shakes, it crashes down. You try again, it crashes again. How many times can a society endure that before it stops believing? With no forests, no boats, and now not even statues that could stand. What crumbled wasn't stone, it was spirit. And in the cracks that followed, something deeper emerged, despair. Many once believed that the Moai were symbols of pride, but perhaps at the end of their journey, they also became symbols of powerlessness. When even the most sacred, the most beautiful, the most magnificent could not withstand reality. And yet, some Moai still stand, alone, scattered, as if to remind us that once upon a time, there was a people who believed in building the impossible and dared to pay the price for that belief. But not all Moai gaze inland to watch over their descendants. Some stand isolated, on windswept plains or lone hilltops, staring into the void where there are no villages, no paths, no people. They look up. And that was what drew Professor William Liller, an astronomer who had studied ancient monuments around the world. Deep into the mystery of Rapa Nui, he wasn't looking into the soil, he was looking at the light. And he began to notice something strange. Some of the ahu, the sacred stone platforms, were not randomly placed. Several were aligned directly with the rising sun during the solstices, those pivotal moments marking the shift of seasons. At least 14 such ahu have been documented. Just like at Stonehenge, the Mayan temples, or Angkor Wat, these ancient people had watched the sky, memorized the dance of celestial bodies, and etched their knowledge into stone. But on Rapa Nui, precision wasn't carved into monuments, it was carved into their gaze. Some Moai, when cross-referenced with solar models, were found to be deliberately rotated so their empty eyes aligned perfectly with the sunrise on the shortest day of the year, June 21st. Not a coincidence, a calendar in stone, a silent astronomy woven into posture, eyes and shadows. At the summit of Matamayango, a low, lonely hill, the winter solstice light slices through a mountain gap and lands on the tilted face of a solitary Moai. It's not a symbol of dominance. It's a ritual, welcoming light's return after the long, dark reign of winter. For those living in the ocean's heart, Professor Liller once said, the sun, moon, and stars were the only lands they could truly rely on. And those stone eyes, in that exact moment of sunrise, did something no prayer ever could. They linked humanity to the cosmos through utter silence. For a long time, people believed the Moai had no eyes. Their deep sockets were empty, faces of stone, seemingly soulless, expressionless, forgotten. Until one day in 1978, on the beach of Anakina, a small discovery changed everything. A local man, digging near a statue's platform, found two strange fragments. One was pure white coral, soft as chalk. The other, a rough red scoria stone, heavy, textured like dried blood. When placed into the sockets of a nearby moai, they fit perfectly. And in that moment, the silent face of stone woke up. The eyes of the moai, not decoration, not an afterthought. A sacred ritual. According to many archaeologists, these eyes were only installed during special ceremonies, funerals, festivals, sacred gatherings. The white coral reflected sunlight, making the eyes glow. The red pupil, carved from scoria, gave the gaze a stern, piercing, almost judgmental presence. Once the eyes were placed, the moai was no longer just stone. It became a being, an ancestor returned, a spirit, once again among the living. That's why the eyes were never permanent. They were too sacred, only to appear at the right time, in the right place, with the rhythm of ancient rites. Professor Joanne van Tilburg, who has spent her life studying the moai, believes the eyes were part of the life-death cycle of Rapa Nui belief. At sites where moai eyes have been found, remnants of cremation, ashes, and funeral offerings were also discovered. Perhaps, when a chief passed away, a statue was completed, the eyes inserted, and the soul summoned so the entire community could bow before that gaze. Empty, yet profoundly human. And there's one final, chilling image. In the dying light of evening, when red sunlight sweeps across the island and catches a moai's face, if the eyes are still intact, the red scoria pupil reflects the sun's fire, and the stone gaze appears to ignite. No one can prove the moai ever came to life. But looking into those burning eyes, one might understand why the ancestors believed that stone could see, hear, and judge. Not all moai eyes have survived. Most have been lost, buried, or shattered. But even one, just one pair of eyes, is enough to forever change how we see the moai, not as monuments, but as souls waiting to be awakened one last time. You couldn't raise a moai without wood. You couldn't raise one without a large, synchronized community pulling in rhythm, believing in something sacred, but the forests were gone. And with the rustling of leaves, the dream of a civilization fell silent. In sediment cores drilled from the crater lakes, scientists found more than ash and dust. They found evidence of collapse. The once rich layers of fossilized pollen now showed only faint traces. Charred tree trunks mixed with volcanic ash. No more forest to protect the soil. Only eroded earth, scarred and split like the veins of a dried-out corpse. There was a time when Rapa Nui was lush and green, palm trees more than 20 meters tall, birdsong, offshore fish. People cut trees to build boats, to roll statues, to cook, to build homes, to perform rituals. Each fallen tree became part of culture, but no one stopped to count. No one asked, how many trees remain? And then, one day, the last tree fell. No alarm, no ceremony, just no more moai were ever built again. No trees meant no boats. No boats meant no fishing far from shore. No firewood meant no cooking. No materials meant no houses, and no way to move statues. A chain reaction tore through society like a slow-motion collapse, dominoes of despair that no one could stop. The Rapa Nui, once skilled sculptors, astronomers, ocean engineers became survivors. Society fractured. Clans that once cooperated in harmony now turned against each other, fighting over tubers, birds, and what little remained. Famine arrived, and with it, something even darker, cannibalism. It lingers today in the most haunting of oral legends. Some shrines were destroyed. Some moai were toppled, not by nature, but by human hands. No one had time to look at the stars. No one had strength to raise statues. Every day became a struggle to survive just one more night. And the moai, once the pride of the island, became silent victims, forgotten, abandoned in the fields. Some were blamed for the downfall. Some were seen as burdens of the past, and many simply were no longer anyone's concern. Rapa Nui was not invaded. It was not leveled by a single catastrophe. They did it themselves, little by little, over centuries, with the belief that there would always be more, until there was nothing. And when it was all over, only the stone remained, silent Moai facing inland, skyward, or lying face down in the dirt. No one could hear what they once said. But in that silence, we began to listen. Today, the statues still stand on dry grass. Beneath a boundless sky, Easter Island has not vanished. The Rapa Nui people remain. They live on, preserving their culture through dances, rituals, and a silence full of pride. They don't see the Moai as ruins, but as a promise unfinished. Each statue, each stone gaze, each broken fragment by the roadside is not just an artifact. They are memories, the bones of a civilization that once reached greatness and then cut down its own roots. Not out of ignorance, but out of faith. Faith that resources would never run out. That the ancestors would always protect them. That the past could be carved forever into stone. Arthur C. Clarke once wrote, "No place on earth has been studied more than Easter Island, and no place leaves us feeling we know so little." The statues say nothing, and perhaps that's why we are forced to imagine their whispers. Maybe it's a warning, maybe it's a reminder, or maybe it's a question. Are we, with our skyscrapers, satellites, and super cities, walking the same stone-paved road as Rapa Nui once did? Are we building new Moai, this time of steel, silicon, and ambition, without noticing the ground beneath us cracking? As the sun dips below the Pacific horizon, the shadows of the Moai stretch long across the earth, like the claw marks of history. We can choose to look away, or we can stop, just for a moment, gaze back into those stone eyes and ask ourselves, if stone could speak, would we dare to listen?